How artistic nude have evolved over time, and what does this reveal about the world we've lived in across the ages? This topic is divided into 3 parts, and this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, I recommend watching it first, where we explore the evolution of the nude from antiquity up to the late 18th century. In this part, we'll continue the story, looking at how artists approached the nude from the 19th century to the interwar period. Let's dive in. Between the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the foundations of modern Western society were laid politically with the fall of absolutism and the rise of democratic governments inspired by the French Revolution, and economically with the Industrial Revolution. Modern art developed alongside academic traditions, challenging them and placing the artist at the center of cultural evolution. In the 19th century, the female nude became more prevalent than ever. Yet women were increasingly portrayed as objects of sexual desire, dehumanized within a male-dominated society. These works often depict voyeuristic scenes, women sleeping or grooming, seemingly natural but carefully orchestrated by the artist. As art historian Carlos Reyero notes, we find ourselves with women not naked but undressed. Neoclassicism, still dominant at the start of the 19th century, shaped the ideal of the female nude by blending classical models with a refined sense of anatomy. Jean-Auguste-Dominique stands at the junction between neoclassicism and romanticism. He repeatedly used a limited repertoire of poses, such as the seated nude seen from the back in Debat-Ponsan bather, later echoed in larger compositions like the Turkish bath. His figures combine anatomical precision with an idealization inherited from antiquity, while already suggesting the sensuality that would grow in later movements. Romanticism developed in reaction to these strict academic norms, placing expressive force and subjective vision at the center of creation. Theodore Géricault, influenced by Michelangelo, often studied corpses in morgues to better understand the body's structure, giving his works an intense physical presence. Eugène Delacroix broke further away from academic art through fluid drawing and a color system built on adjacent tones and subtle division of light and shade. His figures, whether historical or allegorical, embody emotional intensity, as seen in Liberty Leading the People, where the heroine's partially nude appearance serves both symbolic and aesthetic purposes. Orientalism emerged alongside Romanticism, fueled by travel, colonial expansion, and a growing fascination with distant cultures. It offered European artists a repertoire of subjects considered exotic and visually rich. Delacroix and Chassériau played a key role in shaping this movement after their journey to North Africa, incorporating new palettes, fabrics, and settings into their work. Orientalist painters often used these themes to justify depictions of the nude within harem or bath scenes, presenting them as ethnographic or historical while actually reinforcing Western fantasies and gendered power dynamics. In the mid-19th century, alongside these stylistic innovations, academic art reached both its peak and its decline. As the evolution of artistic styles began to move away from classical canons, academic art remained constrained by a classicist style based on strict rules and focused on erudite themes drawn from history, mythology, and literature. The nude held a central place within this framework and was adapted to the generally puritanical environment of 19th century society. According to academic doctrine, the male nude expressed moral character, whereas the female nude embodied ideal beauty. This hierarchy led artists to focus heavily on the female body, depicting smooth, polished forms with a waxy porcelain-like texture. Despite its prestige, this tradition, later mocked in France as l'art pompier, was increasingly criticized as conservative, anchored in the past, lacking of imagination, and disconnected from contemporary concerns. From the middle of the century, a trend emerged that emphasized reality and the depiction of the surrounding world, especially workers and peasants in the new industrial era. Often carrying a component of social critique, its protagonists were no longer nobles, heroes, or gods, but ordinary people from the streets, portrayed in all their misery and harshness. Sculptor Constantin Meunier focused on depicting workers and laborers of the new industrial era, replacing the classical hero with the modern proletarian. Gustave Courbet's work marked the introduction of realism into the nude. He was the first to depict the body as he saw it, without idealizing, contextualizing, or placing it within an iconographic theme, just faithfully transcribing the forms he observed in nature. His models were generally of robust constitution, as in the bathers. The Impressionists broke sharply from classical tradition, creating a new pictorial language, inspired by nature and freed from academic conventions. Edouard Manet caused major scandals with his paintings Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe and Olympia, not because of the nude itself, but because he portrayed anonymous, contemporary women in a real setting, stripped of any mythological or allegorical justification, openly suggesting that they were prostitutes. Degas deliberately distanced himself from conventional ideals of beauty, favoring instead the young, undeveloped body type. His works are characterized by a snapshot-like quality, capturing fleeting moments influenced by photography and often imbued with a subtle sense of voyeurism. Degas also pioneered a subgenre of the nude, the toilette, portraying women engaged in acts of personal hygiene, often shown from the side or from behind, to emphasize the effect of a stolen instant. In his own words, "It is as if I were looking at her through the keyhole." Renoir depicted the female body with realism, placing it in luminous, evocative settings that conveyed a serene vision of nudity. He painted sculptural nudes, softening their contours in true Impressionist technique through patches of light and shadow, capturing form and relief through color rather than line. John Singer Sargent similarly focused on realistic, naturalistic nudes, emphasizing careful observation of the human form and mastery of light, bridging European academic traditions with Impressionist influence. The main representative of pointillism, a technique based on the use of colored dots to build the image, Georges Seurat was often criticized for being able to apply it only to landscapes. His main contribution to the nude genre was models, where he sought to prove that the pointillist technique could be adapted to any subject. In this work, he offered a modern reinterpretation of the traditional theme of the Three Graces, depicting models posed in his own studio. Among the post-impressionists, Paul Cézanne structured the composition in geometric forms, cylinder, cone, and sphere, in an analytical synthesis of reality, a precursor of Cubism. He approached the nude like a landscape or still life, emphasizing the interplay of color and volumes immersed in light, as in his bathers. Paul Gauguin experimented with depth, redefining the pictorial plane through flat symbolic colors. His time in Tahiti allowed him to depict a world of simple serenity, where nudity was presented as natural and unself-conscious. Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, unlike the stylized nudes of the academic salons, portrayed the female figure in its raw sensuality, embracing the body's imperfections, often set in circus and music hall scenes. In sculpture, Auguste Rodin was a major innovator, focusing on ordinary people of his time rather than mythological or religious subjects. He worked with models who moved freely in his studio, capturing every posture and gesture with remarkable skill to preserve spontaneity. His figures often convey dramatic tension and a sense of tragedy. The 19th century is also the era that saw the invention of photography. Artistic nudes appeared very soon after photography was invented, as early as the 1840s. These images were often inspired by academic painting and initially served as references for artists, as studies of the human body. The modern concept of the photographic nude began to gain recognition from the 1880s to 1900s, with photographers such as Eugène Durieux and later Alfred Stieglitz and Edward Weston in the early 20th century. In the late 19th century, artistic movements multiplied across Europe, often overlapping and reacting to one another. In Great Britain, the Pre-Raphaelite school emerged, drawing inspiration, as their name suggests, from Italian painters before Raphael, as well as from the newly developed art of photography. While their subjects were often lyrical or religious, they also explored the nude. Symbolism emerged primarily in France and Belgium before spreading across Europe as a reaction against realism and impressionism. It focused on the dreamlike and the fantastic, as well as on darker themes such as the satanic, sex, and perversion. It was an aesthetic response to the ugliness and materialism of the industrial age, synthesized in Théophile Gautier's formula l'art pour l'art, art for art's sake. Numerous symbolic and allegorical figures, such as the Sphinx, mermaid, chimera, Medusa, and winged genie, appeared, while an artificial, androgynous, and ambiguous type of beauty became fashionable. A group of artists known as the Nabis, influenced by Gauguin, focused on the expressive use of color. Among them, Félix Vallotton developed an ironic style with dark humor and unabashed eroticism, while Pierre Bonnard painted nudes under various types of light, both natural and artificial, often in intimate bedroom or boudoir scenes, favoring reflections in mirrors and compositions based on photographs. In Germany, Franz von Stuck developed a decorative style bordering on modernism and Jugendstil, with a symbolist subject matter characterized by torrid eroticism. In Austria, Gustav Klimt created a fantastical, highly ornamental world, rich in eroticism, intertwining sex and death, dealing without taboos with sexuality, including themes such as pregnancy, lesbianism, and masturbation. In Switzerland, Ferdinand Hodler was influenced by Dürer, Holbein, and Raphael, developing a style known as parallelism, characterized by the repetition of lines, colors, and volumes. Linked to symbolism was so-called naive art, created by self-taught artists with instinctive, unstructured compositions and a touch of primitivism. Major protagonist of this movement, Henri Rousseau produced innovative works of great freshness and simplicity, often favoring exotic jungle landscapes. 20th century art underwent a profound transformation in a more materialistic, consumer-driven society. Modernism broke traditional rules. Abstraction, distortion, and fragmentation transformed the nude into a field for experimentation, reinvention, and critique. The beginning of the century was also marked by major scientific discoveries, such as those of Einstein and Bergson, which challenged notions of reality. At the same time, new technologies like photography and cinema were already capturing the world around us, prompting art to change its function and avant-garde artists to shift toward the perception of the surrounding world. During this period, the nude gained increasing prominence, particularly through mass media, which allowed its wider dissemination in film and photography. Nudity no longer carried the negative connotations it once held, largely due to growing secularism, which regards the human body as natural rather than morally objectionable. Two early revolutionary works of the 20th century were nudes, Henri Matisse's Blue Nude and Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, both from 1907. In these paintings, the nude becomes a symbolic conceptual element, marking a return to subjective perception. The reduction of the human figure to basic schematic forms in these works paved the way for abstraction, later seen in pieces like Constantin Brancusi's Nude, where the female torso is simplified into a cylindrical shape. Fauvism, often considered the first avant-garde movement led by Matisse, liberated color from its connection to the subject, organizing space through color planes and creating new sensations with bold, striking areas of vivid color in an arbitrary, non-imitative way. Emerging as a reaction to Impressionism, primarily in Germany but also across Europe, notably in Norway, Austria, and Russia, Expressionism defended a more personal and intuitive art, based on the artist's inner vision over reality. German artists of the Die Brücke subgroup in particular made the nude their favorite subject, whether indoors or outdoors, portraying it naturally and without taboo or provocation. Let's mention the work of Emil Nolde, who used a divisionist technique with thick impasto, short brushstrokes, and bold chromatic contrasts. Already a leading figure of German Impressionism, which, unlike French Impressionism, focused more on nudes than on landscapes, Lovis-Corinth later moved toward Expressionism, creating works of psychological introspection often centered on erotic and macabre themes. The New Objectivity movement, which emerged in Germany in the 1920s as a reaction against Expressionism, with Otto Dix as a major protagonist, focused on realistic, often harsh and socially critical depictions of contemporary life, including the horrors of war. Arno Breker, in contrast, embodied a state-sanctioned neoclassicism that celebrated idealized heroic forms, standing apart from the personal expression of Expressionism and the critical realism of New Objectivity. In Vienna, Egon Schiele, a disciple of Klimt, focused on sexuality, loneliness, and isolation, often with voyeuristic and explicit content that once led to his imprisonment for alleged pornography. Primarily a draftsman, he emphasized line in his compositions, creating stylized, elongated figures in tense, oppressive spaces, using vivid colors to highlight contours. In France, the School of Paris was formed during the interwar period, a diverse group of artists associated with styles like post-impressionism, expressionism, cubism, and surrealism. Amedeo Modigliani, a bohemian figure immersed in sex, drugs, and alcohol, was one of its main exponents. In his works, he emphasized outlines, shaping space through juxtaposed color planes, with elongated figures inspired by Italian Cinquecento masters. Other members of the School of Paris included Marc Chagall, who created dreamlike works bordering on surrealism, freely distorting reality in unreal spaces that ignore perspective and scale, blending childhood memories with elements of dreams, music, and poetry. In sculpture, Norwegian artist Gustav Vigeland created an extraordinary sculptural ensemble in the Frogner Park in Oslo, featuring over 100 nude figures that depict all stages of human life in a serene, optimistic, and naturalistic style free from moralizing. Pablo Picasso went through several periods before ending up in Cubism, including his Rose period, notable for its nudes. The Young Ladies of Avignon, painted at the very beginning of his African period, was a total break with traditional art, making a plea against conventional beauty based on rules and proportions. Already the chosen theme, a brothel, signals protest and provocation, but also the treatment of the figures as deconstructed geometric forms further reveals the artist's desire to demystify the classical concept of beauty. Cubism was based on the deformation of reality by breaking with spatial perspective, organizing space through geometric structures and showing objects from multiple viewpoints, using a palette of cool, muted tones. Dadaism, born as a reaction to the horrors of war, took a radical approach to the concept of art, abandoning any component of logic and reason. Its leading figure, Marcel Duchamp, deconstructed the human body into geometric forms, capturing motion through overlapping sequences. Surrealism emphasized imagination, fantasy, and the world of dreams, drawing heavily on psychoanalysis. Its most eccentric figure was Salvador Dali, who was fascinated by Freudian theory. Much of his work reflects an obsession with sex and the Freudian tension between the pleasure principle and the reality principle. René Magritte created works in which the ordinary coexists with the fantastic, often in unsettling atmospheres that leave interpretation open to the viewer. Paul Delvaux developed a kind of figurative painting that was quietly unsettling, where nude women appear alongside men who gaze at them with voyeuristic intensity or with skeletons evoking Baroque vanitas. His works create an atmosphere of eerie, dreamlike eroticism. Frida Kahlo's intensely personal work, often linked to surrealism, reflects her life marked by a spinal injury and her husband's infidelities. In Unos Cuantos Piquetitos, she depicted a recent murder committed out of jealousy, projecting her own pain over betrayal. The Broken Column is a self-portrait showing the steel corset she wore after her accident, with her body pierced by nails and her spine represented as an ionic column. In sculpture, Konstantin Brancusi simplified the human figure to near abstraction, as in Sleeping Muse. Alberto Giacometti followed with transparent constructions, reducing figures to slender filaments. Henry more abstracted the body with dynamic flowing lines that suggest rather than define form. Hans Bellmer explored sadomasochistic eroticism through articulated mannequins posed in various positions. During the Roaring Twenties, Art Deco celebrated luxury and opulence. Tamara de Lempicka's nudes portrayed women of her time elegant, refined, and glamorous, like figures straight from a fashion magazine. And simultaneously, Edward Hopper, a key figure of American realism, portrayed modern urban life with a stark realism, emphasizing solitude and silence. His nudes and interiors reveal psychological tension rather than sensuality, marking a shift toward a more introspective vision of the human figure. From the early 19th century up to the interwar period, the way artists depicted the human body evolved dramatically. Nudes moved from classical ideals to explorations of modern life, emotion, and social reality. After 1945, this evolution accelerates even further as artists respond to the upheavals of the modern world and push the figure into ever more experimental and expressive territory. That's what we'll explore in the third and final part, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to comment, like, and share. See you soon, and thanks for watching.